Yeah, as mentioned, I'm at the University of California, Irvine, and I'm a novice among experts. I was a couple years ago in a business office working with Canon with printers, and knew that I really was interested in transitioning career-wise, and so jumped into the program at UCI on urban and regional planning. And while I've been there, I've been very interested in design, and so I've looked for opportunities like this one to supplement looking at things that are out there as I transition into a practitioner role that are available in the design sphere. And this is a photo from last summer. I was very fortunate to get to go traveling in Peru, and things like this that have been inspirations of green infrastructure that I've just kind of kept my eyes on along the way. And you see there's a little inlet at the top, and that is filtering fresh water from the top of a mountain. And even when there's not rainfall, it's capturing water from the cloud forest. And so there's just a constant stream of water flowing through this village where no one's been living for 500 years. Also in Peru, but a different culture, this is on Lake Titicaca. There's the floating Uros Islands, and these islands and the boats and the homes are all made from reeds that grow naturally in the lake. And so I think I've just been able to experience some things like this along the way that show that there is the capacity and potential for green infrastructure to really be more integrated in our lives. So my problem statement is here, coming back to the US, that infrastructure is aging, and a lot of hard engineered structures and systems are nearing their end of life, and there's been an emergent interest in green infrastructure because of its potential benefits, but there's a need to encourage better design and incorporation of green infrastructure instead of just defaulting to gray projects. This bridge actually is something that I looked at for my professional report I did at the program at UCI, and there's going to be a light rail line, the first one in Orange County in Santa Ana area, and so I looked at separately in that project how green infrastructure could be incorporated there. So this year released the American Society for Civil Engineers gave a generic D+ rating for our infrastructure, and that comes as a result of past due upgrades or maintenance that's been deferred. And obviously we here have seen examples of what that is referring to with situations like the Oroville Dam spillway that was damaged back in February. So my research question is that can a rating system for infrastructure and landscapes encourage resilience and innovation in design in the same way that LEED has done for physical structures? And so simple methodology, just I wanted to identify potential resources that were available for filling that need. And then to test a couple of those sample resources and see how those compared to the existing regulatory framework. So broad literature review, identification of those systems, sample implementation using an existing project, which actually was on someone else's slide. I used the South Los Angeles Wetland Park. And then analyze how those rating metrics addressed green infrastructure and related design elements. This is just a couple of the things that I referenced, and I'm going to touch on the first one especially because that touches so closely to the GRASS initiative that we heard about earlier. And Karen Firehawk worked collaboratively with the Forest Service in North Carolina to develop a guide for how to practically implement green infrastructure, and her first step was mapping. So that just shows like where that GRASS could be headed is prioritizing and mapping, and then moving towards planning, in this case with the city of Los Angeles, and then projectizing, which is how do you actually make those individual projects translate to the plan that you've put together. And I think that the tools that I'm looking at really help touch on that last element, the projectizing part. So in identifying tools, I found a lot of different things that were out there and available, and I decided to group those into categories. So the first category is, I called it landscape, but really refers to things that look at a broader area. So Esri, which produces the GIS software, has a new web tool, but it at this point only looks at larger scales, city and landscape. So it will say this is the percentage of intact habitat core area you have in that county or in that city. But you can't really get down to the neighborhood scale or project scale. Institutional are educational facilities or educational opportunities for certificate programs or training programs in green infrastructure. One example would be a rain garden certification program that's offered at Rutgers University. The specialist category was developed more out of private industry, so businesses, especially like green businesses that develop programs to certify or train their employees for more like niche aspects of green infrastructure, such as green roof installation or pervious pavement installation. I was mainly interested, however, in the far right column, the generalist column, which maps or aligns more closely to that lead model of touching on a variety of different design elements and also lining up line item style credits based off of a project. So Sites and Envision are two of those programs in that category. And they have a slightly different focus, but there's definitely room of overlap. And so the project I selected later is one project that that falls in the wheelhouse of both of those programs for review. So Envision was developed by people in the engineering world, and so reflects more of the engineering interest. And Sites was developed more in the landscape architecture world. But again, there's definitely some overlap. Envision came out of a collaboration between American Society for Civil Engineers and the Harvard's Zofnass program for sustainability. Sites came out of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center at UT Austin and in collaboration with the American Society of Landscape Architects. So both have ratings categories that break down how projects are reviewed. Envision has 5 broad categories: quality of life, leadership, resource allocation, natural world, climate, and risk. Sites positions theirs more as like the life cycle of a project, looking at site assessment through site design, and then later on construction, operations, and maintenance. Both of them have a certification process that is a third-party verification. So how that works is you would submit with your project team, this is our project, here's the credits we think we've earned. And then someone, you don't know who, someone will review that based off of the criteria that are established for each of those line item credits and say yes, yes, no, no, yes, no. And on the no items, there'll be comments saying like, you haven't demonstrated from your documentation that you've achieved this. If you want to earn these additional points, you'd have to provide additional documentation. So I looked specifically at the Los Angeles Wetlands Park, South Los Angeles Wetlands Park, which was a project funded by Prop O back in 2006. And the purpose kind of relates to my hypothesis that there's going to be differentiation between the results of the CEQA process and the project ratings processes based off of their missions. So the purpose of the environmental impact report is to identify the significant effects of a project on the environment. Envision provides a holistic framework for evaluating and rating the community, environmental, and economic benefits. And then Sites says that it offers a comprehensive rating system designed to distinguish sustainable landscapes. So you can already see just from their mission statements a bit of a distinguishing factor between a focus on impacts versus a focus on sustainability or improvement in design. So I did a quick word use comparison between the credit guides and the EIR for that project, just to see how those mission statements, if those terminology differentiations continued to show up there. And you can see that it did. So the word or variations of the word impact showed up more than 1,200 times in the EIR. Impact is definitely still addressed by the Envision and Sites reviews, but much less. Design is about even between the three. But then you can see that some word groups like sustainability and innovative are much more exclusive to the project review. And ironically, climate, the word climate was not used in the EIR at all for the South Los Angeles Wetland Park. So this is just a visual of that's what the park looks like. That's the site design for that project. So I went from the project to looking into now for both of the ratings structures, how do they address some of those different design elements? And so the next couple of slides are more of the introduction before the credits, and then I'm going to follow up with a sample credit that reviewed one aspect. So on green infrastructure, Envision looks at recognizing the serious need for infrastructure to incorporate issues of sustainability. Sites says, in contrast to buildings, built landscapes and green infrastructure have the capacity to protect and even regenerate natural systems. For environmental justice, Envision says quality of life addresses a project's impact on host and affected communities. Sites says a goal of Sites is provide regenerative systems as intergenerational equity. So they are obviously like including these elements as goals, and we'll look at how that translates to the credits again, especially with this resilience category. So Envision mentions resilience, as does sites, and then Envision has a specific category related to resilience, which you can see here, with the two subcategories of emissions and resilience. And I'm going to focus in specifically on this one here, CR 2.4, prepare for short-term hazards. So this is what the credit system looks like. It's an online system, and it's non-linear. So you can see that there's not a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 score, but rather the 0, 3, 10, 17, 21. So it's scaled based off of the impact of the different levels. But they do build on each other. So you can't have any of the higher levels without first achieving the lowest level of doing a hazard assessment. So that has to be part of the documentation before you can advance to anything higher. And from that hazard assessment, then you can demonstrate whether or not the project achieves the goal of preparing for a 1 in 50-year hazard or something even more resilient than that. Sites doesn't have a specific climate resilience category, but several credits are embedded throughout that I found. So I bolded a couple here, such as reduce heat, urban heat island effects, use vegetation to minimize building energy use, reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. I'm going to look at this one, soil credit 4.6, conserve and use native plants. And this is what the credit, someone reviewing or submitting a project would be looking at this as the context for how to earn that credit. And so there's going to be a general intent and then instructions on how they can achieve those progressive credits. So the intent would be for this credit, to foster habitat for native wildlife that is necessary for plant reproduction by conserving or installing plants that are native to the site's ecoregion. And I think one of the things that stands out about these programs is that there's just clear-cut tiers often for the credits. So in this case, like a 20% total native plant score, or 40 or 60 for the progressive scoring. But these programs are also kind of hybrid in that they reference a lot of existing municipal or larger agency standards. In this case, they use the EPA standard for ecoregion to establish which plants are appropriate to get the plant score. So the EIR statement of overriding considerations, so the summary for that highlighted that there's a few impacts that are significant after mitigation, including PM10 emissions, the removal of potentially historic buildings, and temporary significant noise impact. However, the preferred project does highlight benefits of meeting the surface water runoff TMDL requirements, providing new green space and public facilities and recreation facilities in a community where these are needed. So the city of Los Angeles concluded that the project's benefits outweigh and override its unavoidable significant impacts. So the EIR comes to the conclusion, but the EIR is a yes-no situation, and which I found interesting, being new to the planning world, that CEQA, the original purpose of CEQA is providing information, but you don't get quite the scale of someone coming from a lay perspective of what are the benefits and drawbacks of a project, in the same way that I think that these scoring ratings can show, where you can see that in this project, for instance, it scored really well on quality of life in natural world. But so someone who is concerned about climate and risk can look in that specific category, though, and see what are the things that this project is doing well, but what are they not doing well as well, and set targets for how to improve those categories. So sites, you can see here, this is just my summary page of when I scored that project, and they earned 101 of the credits for sure, and then 19 I couldn't verify. I would need additional information to verify those. But I think that's also one of the benefits that these programs offer, is that the potential to upgrade, if that makes sense. It gives an easy incentive to move from one level up to the next tier. To invest makes it more clearly how much needs to be invested in a certain direction to earn more credits to go beyond. So just a quick strengths analysis. For the EIR, of course, it's very good at identifying impacts and conducting technical analysis, and it has the strength of, like regulation behind it. Some of the threats that we all know is that there's sometimes projects that come pre-cooked where, here's the good project and we're going to submit 2 alternatives that are clearly terrible so that our good project looks good. Instead of having the project that they want and working on improving that project. And the rating system evaluation seems to be an opportunity for maybe a complementary improvement where it can be a tool for agencies to focus in on priorities and potentially work on improving project design throughout the process. So where do they fit? This kind of goes back to, again, that first presentation where this is what lead agencies are going to be responsible for, is the mapping and prioritizing and planning. But a lot of times projects, the public agency isn't implementing that whole grass corridor along the way. So how do you engage other entities in that? And I think that's where potentially ratings programs could come involved. It could be playing a role. So in projects like the LA River or Santa Ana River that are clearly priority corridors, setting planning standards that incorporate elements of rating systems like this. And they don't need to necessarily use even the whole program, but could highlight certain priority credits as targets that must be met for that project area. So just a recommendation would be to use the strengths and opportunities of the ratings programs to offset the weaknesses and threats in the CEQA process, and starting by mapping priority project zones. And one way to integrate ratings processes would be through the conditions of approval at jurisdictional level, and by setting individualized standards such as a baseline score for health, for human health. And lastly, one thing that is a critique of these systems, I found that you can go on and see case studies that highlight benefits of projects that earned a certain reward level, but there's not, the supporting documentation that's required to earn that level is not publicly available. So if this were to be something that was incorporated in some aspect of the city process, it would be that's something that would have to be addressed, is how do you move that documentation into the public realm. And I spoke to someone from the group, and one of the reasons that they don't post all of that publicly, especially with infrastructure projects, is concerns for public safety. So there would be a need to kind of navigate how information could be publicly shared and posted so that it is a valuable tool for the community, if that becomes a tool that the community does decide to implement in some way. So that's it. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.